Good morning, Year 10. Okay, so today's lesson we're going to look at the energy and the environment. So here are some questions for you to have a go at, purely just to see what you can remember. So recap questions. What pollution are wind turbines associated with? What type of energy resource uses PV cells? What does geothermal energy use to heat water? What energy resource uses the moon? And what energy resource uses a dam? Have a think about those. Okay, so today's lesson is all about looking at data, okay? And over the last 50 years, we have collected data throughout the countries on Earth. Lots of people have been interested in analysing the sort of data about energy resources. The main one we all tend to hear about is this idea of the carbon dioxide emissions, okay? And you can see that shown here. Also, people like to start thinking about the global surface temperature and how the Earth is getting hotter, and that's going to cause melting of ice caps and problems. Okay, so this is all things that we need to be able to, as scientists, understand what's happening and being able to analyse. So have a look at this. What can you tell me about it? Write down what type of energy resource do you think causes these two main things. So hopefully you've identified that a lot of this is to do with burning fossil fuels. Okay, so carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere has risen in the recent past. We are burning lots of fossil fuels, and in certain countries we burn more fossil fuels than others. This is increasing the levels of greenhouse gases. Human activities have increased the average global temperatures over the last about 150 years, because it's based on this idea of the combustion equation, that the fuel and oxygen is going to give you that carbon dioxide and water. Carbon dioxide then gets trapped in the atmosphere, and when it's trapped in the atmosphere, it doesn't allow the radiation from the sun to be able to get back out from our Earth, and that starts to warm the Earth up. So one of the things people have started to look at is trying to maybe use different fuels instead of those fossil fuels. And when you think fossil fuels, you're thinking of that coal, oil and gas. So nuclear fuels come under this idea of they're renewable and kind of non-renewable, because once you've used the nuclear fission breakdown of a particle, you can't then put it back together without going through a whole thing of fusing it back together. So it gets very complicated. They will run out, but it's going to take a long time. So some nuclear energy have like massive amounts of half-life, so they're going to be around for a while, so we can use them. The nuclear fuel, okay, is, and it says here burned. I don't like that word because it's not burned. The nuclear fission is a reaction that's happening. It's a chain reaction, okay, that drives the energy being given out. So this picture down the bottom here where it says nuclear fission, it's this idea that we can shoot a neutron at a particle. We make that particle unstable, and as we make it unstable, it starts to release energy, and that releases more neutrons, and those neutrons then knock into other particles and atoms, and they break down, and everything's slowly getting broken down. Okay, so it's a chemical reaction that releases nuclear energy to generate heat. So we can use it in the same way that we use coal and oil, in that we can then heat up water. So most nuclear reactions happen underwater. The water then heats up, turns into steam. The steam then raises up and turns the turbines, which generates then the electricity. So the main things that we need to recognise is that there are advantages and disadvantages to using certain types of power. Okay, so if we look at nuclear as an example, it is cheaper to run once we build our nuclear power station. The fossil fuels obviously will not be used, so they'll be conserved. We don't give out this carbon dioxide, we don't give out the sulfur. Generally, as a rule, it is safe, okay, and we use small amounts of fuel. However, in the first instance, it is very expensive to build, because obviously we need to make sure that it is safe and that the nuclear radiation energy is going to be protected. It's non-renewable in the respect that once you've used that radioactive source, you can't use it again, and you get radioactive waste, and therefore we need to put that somewhere or do something with it. And if then you no longer wanted to use the nuclear power station, we would need to what we call decommission the radioactive isotopes, and that's expensive. Okay, and a lot of people don't like the idea of nuclear from this idea there's links with cancer and things like Chernobyl. If you don't know about Chernobyl, look it up. There's a risk that there could be a disaster and something goes wrong. And I mean, Chernobyl happened a very long time ago now, but yet it is still radioactive in the area where the nuclear station was, and so no one can live there. And people don't always like the idea of nuclear. So nowadays we're trying to look at more renewable resources. More renewable resources can be used more than once. They've got an unlimited amount. They've got lower carbon emissions. They're more expensive to create, and they do have an environmental impact, but they can be more useful and what we class as more healthy for the environment. Non-renewable, obviously, we've got this idea they're only used once, tend to be fossil fuels, and they have a limited supply. They tend to have high carbon emissions. They are less expensive, which is why most of the time that's what we've been using, because it's less expense. But again, they do have that environmental impact. So we need to be able to consider the pros and cons of these types of sources. So the big question now that is being asked all over our planet is how are we going to meet the planet's needs for energy in the future? You need to decide what energy resource we should be using in the future, and you're going to argue your case. You need to think about the cost, the impact not only on the environment but emissions, the availability of that resource, whether the supply is enough, what location you would need, and what kind of waste products. I want you to make a list or a poster of your ideas, okay, and reasons for your arguments, okay. So you need to make sure you argue your case that you should be using this. So you need to dismiss any of the negatives. So any negatives that you can think of, how would you argue against those negatives? So the next few slides just give you some information, okay, about fuels, so to help you hopefully do your poster, okay. So you've got pros and cons on your fossil fuels, okay. So remember, you're going to be accentuating the pros and trying to dismiss those cons. Again, here we're just recapping renewables. So what are the pros? What are the cons of renewables? Okay, how is this going to help you to argue your case? And if anyone is thinking about that nuclear energy, here's some pros and cons to help you with your debate there. And finally, some extra information just to help you out. Gas-fired power stations, pumped and storage stations can meet various demands, okay? Fossil fuels are reliant in most other countries, okay? Nuclear power stations are expensive to build. Carbon capture for fossil fuel emissions is likely to be very expensive. Renewable resources are cheap to run but expensive to install. So these are the things that you need to think about in your debate. What we would be expecting from you from this lesson then, please, is either a PowerPoint, a poster, or a list of your arguments for, okay, and try and refer to kind of the research that you've looked at, maybe even give me some statistics, make sure you've identified where you would want to be building this place, okay, where would you be using this energy, where are you going to get this energy, how are you going to use it, okay. More detail, the better, please. And remember to send it to Miss Nixon, okay, at knixon@knoleacademy.org. This will all be on the email sent out. And the final thing for today then, little plenary, all I want you to do is write out this with the gaps, fill in the gaps, and then if you go through the PowerPoint and click through to the end, it will give you the answers. Okay, so make sure you pause the PowerPoint for a moment and write down this, fill in the gaps before you then unreveal these words and tell me what they are. Okay, well done for today's lesson, and hopefully we'll see some amazing work coming from you soon.